We're on this computer. All right. Welcome to Hannah's Corner, for all those tuning in for the first time. Hannah's Corner is a monthly live stream featuring women in jazz, from performers and composers to agents and writers. It's a growing community and a support network for both fans and artists alike. And we're really excited to welcome Thana Alexa. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. It's really nice to be with you here.
Thanks so much. Really glad that you could make some time out of your, probably very hectic schedule right now. I understand live shows are actually picking up. What I hear.
I mean, it's, I was kind of talking about this the other day, that I'm like overwhelmed with nothing and everything at the same time. The live shows haven't really started, for me at least, yet. I know a lot of people have been doing some stuff in New York City, which is where I'm based, doing some park shows, sidewalk shows. I mean, for now, the state of New York has actually banned ticketed musical events until further notice. So that's kind of unfortunate for all of us musicians who are starved for live performances. But there have been a number of live stream things that have been happening over, the course of the last 5 or 6 months, which have been interesting and exciting. Very different kind of energy than being in front of a live audience, that's for sure. But we'll take what we can get.
For sure, ever-changing times.
Yeah.
For just a little bit of background on Thana, for those of you who are new to her music, perhaps, she is a highly collaborative performer, vocalist, composer, and arranger, and she's a leader in the what I call women in jazz movement, having created several projects and groups showcasing women and female-centric collaborations. Sounded like you started music at a very young age, being very proficient, both singing and on violin, very influenced by your heritage. And something that struck me in a review is that, they consider you bringing a global perspective to your music. And I think that's quite an achievement to have that. I'm just wondering what that means to you. How has your background really influenced that global artistry?
Well, I mean, I have an kind of interesting background, because I'm American born. English is my first language, but I was born to Croatian parents. And, my father came to the States in 1961. He went through, basically he was a refugee. He escaped Croatia to go to Germany. And from there, they got their papers to come to the United States. And he actually took the boat over from Genoa. I mean, it's a whole, European immigrant story. My mother's parents escaped communism and came to the United States. And my mother was actually born in New York as well. And so she's first generation American, but also to Croatian parents. And so, I've grown up with this Croatian voice in my family for my entire life. My grandmother, who's 98 years old, still lives in Florida, and who is my everything. She's my soulmate. She and I speak Croatian, exclusively, but with my parents, because they came to the United States. Well, my father came at such a young age. He was about 12, and my mother was born here. So they naturally, even as Croatian people, started speaking English together as they met in New York. And so when I was born and my brother was born, we started speaking English as a family. That's kind of also, part of being an immigrant in the United States, at least from the part of the world that I come from, is that, when people escape hardship and war and, all of these things, and they come to the United States and they start speaking English and they adopt the ways of being American, they're so proud of that, that it just becomes part of the new who you are, even though you never forget where you came from. And so, I had these two very distinct influences, American culture, English language, American music, jazz, and then, but also from my Croatian family, a lot of influences, art, culture, food, music, coming from Croatia. So really, when somebody says that I have a global perspective, I really appreciate that, because what I'm trying to convey through my music are these two voices that really have been parallel throughout my life. And they're really, you know, I'm not fully Croatian, I'm not fully American either. And so, especially when I was younger, it was really, really hard to kind of decide who I was, where, you know, where am I from? What am I? They call, you know, kids like me a third culture kid, which is, you know, we don't really know where we are from, or what language we should speak, or how we should act, or, you know, how we should identify ourselves. And I just think that all of the influences and all the things that I've heard and spoken and learned and read throughout my life, they're all what make up who I am. And so that's what I'm hoping that, you know, my music will kind of portray.
Yeah. I definitely can hear from the music I've heard, is it's beautiful, and it has a primal, especially in Ona, your most recent for this year, it's just like very primal and you know, kind of rich sound to it. Sometimes you leave space, sometimes you add, you know, other elements of sound, you hear a little bit technological element come in, and it just feels very organic. I wonder if is there kind of a in that classical jazz kind of dichotomy in Croatia in terms of music, or is there like other instruments that you bring in sometimes in your arrangements that are Croatian inspired?
I actually didn't bring any Croatian specific instruments into Ona, this record. The thing that I wanted to bring in was, you know, that voice of like a village of women, you know, just a call, you know, a rallying cry, basically, from a village of women, and that kind of ethnic, really primal sound of the rhythm that comes in. I mean, the odd meter thing, which is kind of characteristic of a lot of my music, definitely has its influences from, you know, my Balkan music influences. But then harmonically, there's a lot of stuff coming from pop culture and pop music and jazz harmony. And so I think that it's kind of there's a rhythmic element to the Balkan side of things, and then a harmonic element to the other side.
Wow. That's beautiful. And that's very fresh and new. And I think that's why we're so struck, because it's like its own thing, you know, it's something new. And I think that's why you're very inspiring, I think, also just to women arrangers and composers, because it's not something that you hear a lot about, right? There's a lot of instrumentalists and vocalists, but to be also a really talented arranger, like I was listening to Footprints and Take 5, some of your older videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just your stage presence is captivating, and
thank you.
Ability to transport an audience and be so accessible and human. I think there was a real genuine element that comes from just being, I feel like I'm there, even though I'm virtually doing it. And another cool thing I liked was you work a lot with like looping pedals and you know, bringing that in, and kind of, there was one moment where you were describing like, you know, this is what it is. This is how I do it. This is, I also teach this too, which I thought was like, oh my goodness, she's mastered a new technology. Now she's giving back. How has that gone?
That's been an interesting development. I mean, when I did my first record, Ode to Heroes, I didn't have any of the kind of production elements. Like the production level was not as high as Ona, certainly. And I also didn't do any of the mixing or production myself. You know, I had the engineer kind of handle everything. I had my say on how I wanted things to sound, but, you know, I really wasn't very experienced with anything other than composition at that point, and singing, obviously. But when I did go in to the studio, I recorded a bunch of background vocals. And so when I was shopping the record around, a lot of people were saying, this is great, we love the music, but our question is, how are you going to tour it? You know, how are you going to recreate the sound of the record when you're playing live with a quartet, for example? And so it was actually my husband's idea for me to get just a little kind of starter looper, which had two little pedals. There was one looping pedal and one little effects pedal combined in one machine. It had no memory. It had, you know, it was just kind of like you looped it, you turned it off, and it was forgotten, and that's it. But what it started kind of, you know, cooking in my brain sonically was the ability to create a chorus of me's on stage, or just sounds and colors, and kind of it changed the sonic landscape of every tune based on what kind of effect I was using, what kind of harmonies I was looping. And that kind of started from written material where I was figuring out with the machines how I could recreate what had already been made. And then it started to inform my composition for the next record. So I was actually using the pedal as a way to compose and to like foresee how the song would go. So sometimes a lot of the tunes that are on Ona, they started actually on the looping pedal with me just messing around and recording myself and doing these layers of voices and effects, and with the kind of upgraded setup that I use now, which is 2 looping and effects pedals. You know, you can make the sounds, the voice sound like a human synthesizer. It's really incredible. So it definitely informed compositionally what happened with Ona.
Yeah. So you teach it, correct? Can I sign
I
up
do.
for a course? Is it on?
Do it. Let's do it. Yeah, I've been doing some lessons. I've done a couple of master classes, and I have some videos coming out of just, you know, how to, because, you know, the looping pedal thing, especially ones that you handle with your hands, usually the videos that you see online are either very, very, very pop oriented musicians or singers, or DJs. So there's kind of not a lot of people incorporating it into jazz. There are some instrumentalists who use effects and loops and things like that, but for vocalists specifically, I haven't really found a lot of material. So I feel like it's a really good opportunity to just kind of, you know, I don't have anything, you know, no sound that I'm trying to achieve from something that I've heard before. So I'm just creating as I go, and then hoping that I can help somebody else down the line stylistically.
It might turn into its own genre. I mean,
I hope so. Let's fingers crossed.
that's very cool. Very cool. So, you know, I want to read a quote that really struck me from Becca Stevenson. Is she a part of your group? Correct?
She was on the record. Yeah, she was on one tune. Actually, one of the tunes that I wrote only on the looping pedal, and I had a bunch of layers of my voice. And when I was thinking about what to do for the record, I thought of her voice, and I thought just how beautifully it would, you know, basically the layering of her voice and of my voice hundreds and hundreds of times, and then us singing the melody on top. Yeah.
Beautiful. So a quote I read, it really struck me. Thana Alexa's Ona is an exquisite work embodying boundless creativity and genre that stretches to every corner of the earth and the imagination. Ona is a story of strength, authenticity, and the deeply grounding nature of the divine feminine. I love that quote. It's a powerful.
She's such a beautiful writer too. I mean, she just, you know, lyricist all the way. It's just incredible.
It is.
Wow.
So I wanted to use that to kind of dovetail into your vision for, and what, you know, it's very personal. I get the sense it's deeply personal. It's very grounded in who you are and you know, the divine feminine. And can you maybe just tell us a little about your vision and what you hope to, you know, how do you hope to impact people from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the record, the journey of the record, I should say, started in 2017 in January when I went to the Women's March in Washington, D.C. I had never been part of anything that powerful before, and it really struck me. I mean, I had been very aware of social political things that were happening and had been vocal about my opinions before, but this was really the first time that I was involved in something and felt like I was part of a movement. And when I experienced that feeling of energy of people fighting for something that they believe in, and then many voices becoming one, it gave me this idea that all women is one woman. You know, we have this connection between all of us, no matter where we come from, no matter what our age is, no matter what we look like, no matter what religion we practice, no matter, you know, who we choose to love. There's this female thing that connects all of us. And a lot of the experiences that women have in their lives no matter where they're from or where they find themselves, or, you know, how old they are very similar. And so after going to the Women's March, I was so inspired. I came home and I wrote the first tune on the record, which is actually the second track. It's called The Resistance. And I really wanted to evoke this feeling of marching and resisting, and, you know, somebody screaming into a megaphone these speeches of empowerment. And, you know, it was really, I felt very energized by the whole experience. And then from there, I proceeded to write a number of tunes that I, at that point, thought were completely disconnected. I just was writing. I was inspired and I was writing music. And after I was about 2 or 3 tunes in, I started to realize that the connection was that they all had to do with the lives of women. It was all about every facet of womanhood. It was, you know, our sexuality, what that means to the world compared to what it means to us. How can we feel comfortable in ourselves? There is this wild thing, this wild woman, this wild spirit that exists in women that a lot of times is demonized in society because of the fact that it's feared. You know, we're not supposed to be powerful. We're supposed to be good girls and polite and only get a little crazy when it's acceptable, because, you know, we're kind of satisfying the person that we're with, or, you know, there are all of these things that we kind of digest and learn, and it affects our behaviors and our output of ourselves throughout our lives. And then I started talking to women. I started talking first to the women in my family, and that's my mother and my grandmother. Those are the matriarchs of my family. And my grandmother is 98 years old. She has been through multiple wars. She has been through, you know, she's been hungry. She's been homeless. She's been a refugee. She's been, you know, an immigrant who came here with nothing. She has succeeded. She's, you know, really lived and experienced the so-called American dream, if that's what we want to call it. You know, she really came here and supported her family. But at the point when she was doing what she was doing, it was not a celebrated thing. It was just what you were supposed to do. And I've listened to countless stories of her recounting her experiences as a woman, both, you know, in Croatia, where we come from, traveling to the United States, what it meant to be an immigrant woman, what it meant to be, you know, supporting the family while her husband was basically studying to be a doctor, but wasn't making any money. And he was doing his residency at a hospital, and she had to bring home the bacon, basically. You know, it's just incredible stories like that. And then my mother, who, you know, in a very different kind of generation, she was born in the United States, grew up American to Croatian parents, of course, but then she became, in her time, the highest ranking woman investment banker in the United States back in her time. So she had tons of stories from the business world, you know, kind of sexual harassment and assault stories that she told me, things that I never associated with my own mother, because I just never thought that that was something that happened. And, you know, the thing is that I started to realize that when you talk to women, you give them a chance to speak their truth, and you give them a chance to tell their stories. And so it started with my mother and my grandmother, and also stories that they were telling me of the women in our family who have, you know, passed. And then I started talking to other women and just kind of having these very, very informal conversations about women's roles in society, you know, gender roles that we, you know, conform to, our sexuality, just feelings of wanting to be free, but not really feeling like you can be free. How do we achieve freedom? And then also just a general story of women's experiences of sisterhood, because that was something that I experienced at the Women's March, was this feeling of women standing together, you know, women really supporting each other and not being catty and competitive, and that thing that a lot of times I think society wants us to do because it's, you know, fun to look at. But there's this really powerful thing that happens between women when they support each other. So all of these things were just kind of like swimming around in my mind, flying around. And then I started to write, and song after song came out. And, Ona, which is the title track, I wrote from the perspective of the two women voices in my family, which is why the song is in Croatian and in English, and features a Balkan choir that sings the Croatian lyrics. I really wanted to evoke the sounds of home for me, the sounds of, where the women in my family came from, and the sounds in English, or the lyrics in English, are basically ways of me connecting my current life and, my being American and the things that I've experienced here, with, kind of the old country. And, so it was just like that. It happened very organically. And it was, I keep saying this to people, that I feel like Ona found me. I didn't find her. It really just, it was this very fortuitous thing that happened. And Ona has kind of become almost like the inner voice inside of me, that I feel like if I truly follow the inner voice and I listen to it, I can't go wrong, because, there is that voice that exists within all of us, male, female. There's something that tells you, the path that you need to go on, whether it's easy or not. It tells you the right way to go, and it's your choice whether or not to listen to it. And so I've gained a lot of confidence in who I am, and kind of become all unapologetic about my femininity, whatever that means, about my own power, about my music, about just kind of feeling more comfortable in my own skin and in my own mind. And really, Ona is the reason for that.
That's a beautiful story. That's such a strong story. And I think it's so timely right now with everything that's going on, and with the women's movement, how, I agree, I was also at a march locally here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that same year. And I felt that same energy too. And, I, at that time, wrote a couple of songs about women, and I've been kind of just hiding them away.
Oh, really?
The right moment. And then your album came out. I'm like, wow, okay, this is amazing. There's a whole album about womanhood and sisterhood. And that's a beautiful story. It's, that'll change now when I go back and listen to it, that just knowing that story will just really change how I hear it, and the meaning behind it. So thank you for sharing the backstory.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that you feel that way. You should release your songs. You should do it.
People have been talking to me that the theme of that isn't going to work with the theme of the album. That's going to clash. We can't, do that, So I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Do a single maybe? But
in a sense, though, I mean, of course, it's all based on how you feel about it. But a lot of the tunes on Ona, one of the feedback, the kind of feedback that I got from some people, not a lot, but some, were that the songs felt disjointed to them sonically. That it didn't feel like they went together. It was a little bit too, all over the place. But when you think about it in the context of the story, it does make sense. And, I do personally think that it's cohesive sonically. And even though the songs are different, it's also that in any given day, any moment, you go through different emotional states. And so, the kind of music that I want to be listening to or writing and expressing myself through in, this one state does not at all reflect what I'm going to be expressing in this other state. So, I think it's just life.
Yeah. And being a woman is, it is a roll
up and down. Yeah.
And down. There's many stages and fluctuations, and I think it's more of an experience, the album, like a real experience of womanhood, not in a vacuum, but really throughout time, because it reflects different points you were, different points you were in time, different relationships with yourself. So it's really a personal journey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that to the world and for sharing that. And
thank you for listening. It makes me so happy. It just really does.
Well, and that's the thing. It's just, I'm glad that you've had luck with the live streams, and I'm just glad that's an outlet, because, it would be incredible to see this, see you live, really making this an experience. So I'm glad that the live streams have been going well.
Yeah, I mean, well, at the moment, I'm kind of trying to develop a solo show for the Ona experience,
Wow.
because there's no way to get together with the band and do a tour. My husband, Antonio Sanchez, who's the drummer and co-producer with me on the album, he and I have done a couple of live stream shows where we've featured some of the tunes from the record, and I've figured out how to do some live looping and playing of keyboards while we're while we're playing together, which is great. But what I really want to do is figure out how to do it live solo, Ona, one woman, me and the looper, and see how that could be executed. I think it could be, if done in the right way, it could be really powerful. And seeing as how our situation globally and touring wise, it's very unpredictable still. I think maybe having a very broken down version of the record is going to be a good thing going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And being an arranger yourself, that there's always many iterations or ways to express a song or different instrumentation, which is encouraging, because you come up with your own version. And my thing is, I always forget what version I did. So if I come up with something on the spot that's really great, replicate it. And I'm like, I can't, But that's the kind of the joy of arranging at this time. I can have be a more forgiving with how things are, make do, right? So
yeah.
So Ona has led to a variety of other female-centric projects, and talk to me a little bit about both Sonica and then the Founding Mothers of Jazz project that you started.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I kind of feel like Ona is the first in a body of work that's going to eventually be the representation of like who I am as an artist. I'm really interested in bringing women to the forefront in music. And of course, I started as a jazz singer. And so it's always been a mystery to me why I've not only, but why most of the music that I've learned and been exposed to and, been taught has all been male-centric jazz music, which, I mean, it doesn't discount the fact that the music that I've learned and have been exposed to is just brilliant and genius, gorgeous, and very inspiring. But where are the women? They were there all the time. They existed. And why didn't I hear about their works? And so when the Me Too movement happened and I was working on Ona, I do some shows with a great nonprofit in New York called Music Talks, which basically strives to bring music into small salon settings, very intimate settings, where you not only perform the music, but you talk about the music that you're performing. So the audience gets kind of like a background look at what the music means to you, some historical information. And, the thing is, we as musicians, we go through conservatory and master's degrees programs and tons of research. And, we have all of this background of the music that we're performing that aids in, it basically helps us love and appreciate the music that we're performing. And a lot of times the audience doesn't have that. So what I wanted to try to do was give a history of women in music, very important women that have contributed to the jazz genre that audiences don't always hear about. So, and there have been many, many different versions of this show. So it's not that it's one show and it's only those 10 women. I've been rotating women all around and basically going to different parts in the history of jazz, way, way, way back, going forward to, Motown, going back to old rock and roll, going to, the big band and swing era, all of these different things, avant-garde, and basically I did my own research, and it was incredible for me because you know, I have a degree in jazz and I went to school. I paid the money for a jazz degree, and I didn't learn about most of the women that I did in my own extensive research. And you know, it's really hard to find these stories, but they're there. And so I really made it a point for this particular project to find these, what I called the founding mothers of jazz, and tell these stories, you know, because I didn't want to just find the music. I wanted to find some kind of stories about these women that connected them to the music, that would, you know, be either a heavy story or a funny story, a cute story, a loving story, you know, something that would basically humanize them, that it's not just notes on a page, that these were people that had true experiences and they are real contributors to the music that we love. So that's been a big kind of passion project for me, about finding women in jazz in the history, and bringing their music to life, and recreating it in a way.
I hear a documentary in your near future.
I know. I could be.
Yeah.
And then Sonica is a trio that I have with two incredible New York City based musicians, Nicole Zaritis on piano, keys, and voice, and Julia Adamy on bass and voice. And they're both just phenomenal musicians, and they're great friends of mine. And so it was actually inspired, this group was inspired because a friend of my mother's, who is a female visual artist, was having an exhibit of her work, and she wanted an all-female band to play in the gallery where her pieces were going to be unveiled, basically. And she asked if I could put something together. And so I was thinking about, you know, what could be possible. And so I thought, okay, me and my loops, Nicole singing and playing keys, and Julia playing bass. Okay, so we put it together. We didn't have any of our own music at that point, but we put together some covers and some little arrangements, and we did this little gig. It was, you know, a number of years ago. And at the end of the show, we were all so just kind of hit by how powerful it was. We had a great time playing together, because everybody respects the other one, you know, as musicians and composers and arrangers and as players, but it was just really fun to have that female energy on stage. And we didn't want to have, you know, a girl band, you know, we just wanted to have a band. It just happens to be girls. You know? So we just said, okay, let's see how we can continue doing this. And so we started to do these little gigs, and every time we would have a new arrangement, or somebody would bring something. It basically became a collective, which also for all of us was really fun, because especially for Nicole Zaritis and myself, where we are mainly band leaders, we're the, you know, the ones that write the music, the ones that get the gigs, the ones that organize everything. And in this kind of collective atmosphere, we not only did these arrangements together where everybody was kind of contributing things, but we started to write music as a group. And that was a first for me, to co-write music. And it's just a very different kind of experience having women on stage. It's just different energy. And we just really enjoy playing with each other and the things that we've been able to create. So last year we started, my husband and I have a little studio in our basement, and I kind of floated the idea to the girls, you know, why don't we just start slowly, like a rock band, you know, like U2 takes years to make their records. Why don't we just start recording some stuff downstairs in the studio, and I'll engineer it, and we'll, you know, see what we can come up with. So we started recording last year, and we were really delayed by the pandemic situation. So the recording has stopped for now, but we'll pick it up definitely. But we've recorded a few tunes, and it's been really, really fun just to, you know, have these three brilliant minds, you know, musical minds that think very, you know, very similarly stylistically, have great ideas, and we bounce things off of each other really well. And it's just been a very fun experience. And also to engineer something myself, which is something that I learned from Anna, you know, because it's the first record that I actually produced and edited myself. And so just that experience made this new experience possible. So that's why I feel like it's all this body of work that's like everything's feeding off of each other and kind of creating this woman-centric life.
Yes, that's incredible. It sounds like a book writing itself. I mean,
Right?
powerful. And 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 you're connecting with other greats too, with Regina Carter and other women who are already doing great work and powerhouses in their own right, to be able to kind of converge all these efforts and start projects. The power of collaboration. It's very inspiring. But that's cool that you mentioned you engineered and produced. Now, is that something you self-taught or like you're actually producing's a nebulous word, and I forget if it means like you financed it. Do you actually are the engineer, or are you just guided?
Well, all of the above. So, well, finance-wise, ONA was a very bumpy road. As we all know, it's very difficult and very expensive to make our own records nowadays. The days of the big labels and all the budgets and all that stuff are long gone. And so I did what a lot of people do nowadays, which is that I created a crowdfunding campaign. And I used a platform called Pledge Music. I don't know if you remember that site. But basically, to make a long story short, I raised all the money for the record and they stole the money.
Oh my gosh.
And not only from me, but from thousands of artists. And it's an ongoing investigation. But basically, I'll never see the money. So it was, I had timed it just so that I would have the money in time for the recording day when I had to pay everything.
Oh.
I actually took a screenshot of my calculator that day when I saw how much was coming out of my savings. And then, of course, I never got the money from the crowdfunding campaign. So that was a big bump in the road that definitely delayed things. I mean, it delayed the release of the record by about a year, I would say. But it also provided the time necessary for me to learn things like the production side of things, which I might have not done had it been the other way around. So, there were silver linings in all of the bumps in the road. And so originally, on my first record, Antonio, my husband, who's a great drummer and also has become a really, really great producer, he helped me a lot with just putting things together and kind of, telling me, okay, in this section, I think you would benefit from, having a busier bass line. And then I would go and write that. Or, oh, this section could use some claps. Or, I mean, it was just kind of like he would suggest things that he was hearing. And he was very hands-on with, the production side and helping me produce each tune. And then, so we had kind of discussed him doing the same thing, even though I had much more of a clear vision sonically of what I wanted, but he knew how to achieve it because he had Pro Tools and he had all the plugins and, that kind of thing. So the original idea was that we would sit down together and do it together. But because of the delay of everything, it ended up being that he had to finish his record, producing his record, which I'm also on, his band Migration. This was his record called Lines in the Sand. And he had to submit this to his record label right around the time that I was supposed to be working on Ona. And so he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit down and have a couple of afternoons where I teach you just the basics of Pro Tools. We're going to get you Pro Tools, get you a couple of basic plugins, and you're just going to learn by trial and error like I did. And that's really the way he learned. I mean, he just watched YouTube videos and he, did basically, it was because he had a deadline. And so he had to learn. And I also had a deadline. So I had to learn. And so every time I had a question, of course, I would ask him and he would show me some things and I wrote down a bunch of notes. But essentially, I went in blind and just learned on the go. And so I started by taking, our entire studio session from the day of recording and editing everything together between all the takes and all the solos and all the different voices. And so that was in and of itself a huge learning experience. But then once I pieced everything together and said, okay, these are the actual final tunes in terms of flow, then I had to produce them. So I had to add all the sounds and put all the keyboards and, do overdubs and stuff like that. But mostly I did that all myself. I mean, Antonio did a great deal of it as well. He was on the road and I was on the road, and we were kind of sending sessions back and forth. And we have this kind of like workshop mentality in our relationship, that he will always exchange ideas, and he'll send me what he's working on. I'll send him what I'm working on, and, you know, that kind of thing. So we have this nice like collaborative thing. And so that was kind of the way it came about. But I learned how to do so many things, and it really, it gave me a sense of how much control I can have over my own music, you know, and if I wanted to just experiment and hear, you know, between this second and that second, how would it sound if the shaker came up that much and I added a little bit of echo to it, you know, then I wouldn't have to wait for 3 days for the engineer to get back to me. I would just like go to my computer and go, you know. So it was a really, really great and valuable learning experience. It just added to the whole kind of empowerment feeling of the record, of not only taking ownership of myself as a woman, but taking ownership of myself as a composer and arranger and a producer, and feeling like I could really truly get my message across, because there was no triangulation. Like, it was all coming from the place that I wanted it to come from. And if I wanted something changed, I changed it. And if I liked it the way that it is, it stayed that way. So it was interesting just to kind of own that for the first time.
Okay, I'm glad we didn't just stop at saying you produced it. That's it. I'm glad. I think everyone, but women in particular, need to know that there is a difference, and you know that there are women like you who are doing every single element and controlling all that, and that is incredible. I just personally, as an artist, have a lot of respect for you for that alone.
Thank you.
That is such you're right. It's a huge learning curve. And when you're relying on, you know, someone who has expertise to go and try to learn it yourself, in addition to wearing all the other hats that you wear, whew, that's a feat. I mean,
yeah, and the cool thing about this record is that everything happened organically. So it was I never felt like it was forced, you know. It was just kind of the luck of the draw. It was the situation. It was like everything was a make it work situation. So, you know, I had gotten screwed by this, you know, crowdfunding platform. So I had no money to pay an engineer anyway. And, you know, and so I you know, had to figure out how to do things myself. And I'm glad I did. And that also helped me get a little bit of confidence just in the music business side of things also, because once I was finished with the record and very proud of what I had accomplished, you know, by myself and with Antonio's help, I started shopping it around to labels, and nobody wanted it. And there were a couple of labels that were very interested. One was pretty major, but it was one of those situations where half of the A&R department loved it, half of it felt like it wasn't what they needed at that time on their roster. So that was a little bit of a letdown. But, you know, a lot of other places, you know, these indie labels, they were just basically saying, yeah, you know, we'll give it to you, you know, we'll give you this, you know, crappy deal, and we won't give you any money, and you have to pay for all the CDs, and then we'll take 70% of your royalties. It's like, I don't think so. You know, after, just from like a specifically business standpoint, at that point, you know, I was thinking about what's a good business model at this point. I've spent so much money on this thing. I didn't get the money that people donated to my campaign. So how am I going to get the biggest return, basically? And that was to self-release. So that was another like own it situation. Like at the day that I decided, because I mean, I had been so thrown under the bus by, you know, so many managers and, you know, booking agents and labels and people with opinions and, you know, all of this chatter. It just always makes you feel so bad. And I really had to search, like I had to remember to search and listen to that voice inside that said, this is the right path. It's the harder one, but it will be worth it. and I listened to that voice, and I'm really glad that I did.
Wow. So through and through, 100%, man, that gotta give it to you. That's a 100% self-produced, self everything. That's incredible. I mean, that's really setting a precedent, and just, it speaks to, like, just because everything I've read about it's been like absolutely wonderful, like the press and just the receiving, and just your album artwork is just so beautiful, and your website. So obviously it's working. I mean, it's paid off, and it's an inspiration in its own right, I think. I'm so glad we're able to talk about it. And Hannah's Corner,
Me too.
scream it from the hills, because it's like, I don't know anyone else who's done all of that in their own record. Everything along the way. That's just so incredible.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So what is, let's just wrap up with what's next. Are you already halfway into your next album? What is
Oh man,
projects, right?
Well, the hard thing was that, I mean, the hard and the good thing, I don't even know anymore, was that the record came out in the end on March 27th, 2020. So this was like 2 weeks into the New York City lockdown. The pandemic had already started. And, I had booked my tours for the year by myself. I didn't have a booking agent, didn't have a manager. It was another thing where I had like done all of this work myself. I was so excited. This was my year. And then, so it's a drag. It's a drag, but, that's why I'm trying to figure out this solo show and see how I can kind of revive the record. I also have a music video coming out, which is going to be really, we filmed this, we shot this music video the weekend before the lockdown in New York City. So lucky. And now when I think about the number of people that were together in a room, I'm like, oh my God. But so that's going to be really, really powerful. I'm really excited for that to come out. Still trying to figure out the release of the video. I have also I've been working on some kind of -1 on demos, which basically they're like play along tracks that will go along with charts on my website. So, there's a lot of complicated music on the record. There's a lot of odd time signature stuff. There's a lot of different kinds of parts. There's, lots of vocal parts, lots of guitar parts, lots of piano parts that are written actual parts. And so a lot of people reach out to me all the time asking if they can have charts and, learn what's going on in the music. And so I just decided to basically make these demos, which is basically like, if you're a drummer and you want to learn the music on Ona, you can get the full mastered album minus the drums, and then you can play along to the music. So the same thing for every instrument: bass, guitar, voice, piano. So that's been something that I've been working on as well. Getting that together, that'll be available soon. And then, this pandemic, just like many artists have been experiencing, it's been a dry spell, creatively speaking. I think I was so excited about this project coming out and everything that this year was going to mean Ona related, that I wasn't in the mindset to start creating something new. And I really battled with that for many months and tried to write something new and tried to create something new. And when it didn't happen, I made a conscious decision just to say that's okay. It's not something that has to come out until it's ready. And I think mentally, I don't want to move on to something new until the Ona story has been kind of completed in a way. I'm really worried about moving on musically. But that actually gave a little bit of space and opportunity for my quarantine project, which was that I got together with two really great New York City musicians, Owen Broder and Serintip, and we created a platform called Live from Our Living Rooms, which basically, so we basically, when...
That was your adventure?
Say that again?
That was your concept?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So when gigs and everybody started getting canceled in March, it was actually Serintip, who's a fantastic vocalist, composer, and also looping artist, which is interesting. She started a personal GoFundMe, basically to raise money for her friends who had lost all their gigs. And her friend, Owen Broder, who is a great saxophonist, contacted her and said, hey, I love the fact that you started this thing. I've been thinking, why don't we, would you want to create an online festival and do some, live stream concerts? And she said, that's a really great idea. Let me get in touch with my friend Thana and see if she has any suggestions. And then they contacted me with the idea, and I said, why don't we just make this a big fundraiser, and let's get a nonprofit organization involved who will help us solicit tax-deductible donations, and then we can give a bunch of grants to musicians. So it kind of started as this very humble idea. And then I said, if we're going to get this off the ground I mean, at that point, we wanted to start the festival April 1st, and we had 2.5 or 3 weeks to put it together. It was so bananas. It was so fast. But so I thought, why don't we just reach out to the who's who of music and see who we can get? Because the who's who will get us the press, the who's who will get us the funds, and the who's who will also help lift spirits up, And so in the end, we ended up having a 1-week festival in April with 3 events a day. We had a morning children's show, an afternoon master class or interdisciplinary show, and then 2 evening performances. 4 events a day. And we had Chick Corea and Christian McBride and Joe Lovano, Linda Mahan O, Becca Stevens performed, my friend Nicole Zaritis performed, Michael Mayo. I mean, we had a whole slew of artists that performed. It gave master classes and did children's shows, and we raised 60 grand for musicians. Whoa. It was incredible. And so after we did that, we were like, well, we can't stop here. So basically we then started to see that a bunch of festivals were canceling. And Owen he has a connection to DC. And so he reached out to the DC Jazz Fest and said, hey, we, created this platform and we've been doing these things. We raised all this money for New York City based musicians. And we were wondering if you'd like us to help you do something for DC. And they were like, oh, that sounds great. And so we presented the DC Jazz Fest from home in June. And we raised money for DC area musicians as well. And then in July, we did a 12-day creative summit where we contracted over 120 artists to do workshops, master classes, webinars, and performances. And so basically from the 3 series that we've had since April, we've raised over 140 grand for musicians.
Nice.
And this next round of grants from, what was raised in our July summit, basically after we paid the artists who participated, because at that point, we were so far into the pandemic that we also didn't want to set the precedent that music should be free and that, artists should perform for free. Artists are struggling more than anybody right now. And so it's important to A, have a gig, and B, if you have a gig, maybe give a little portion of that gig's earnings to musicians who are less fortunate. So basically everybody that participated knew that a portion of their revenue would go back into our fundraiser to help facilitate another round of grants. So it's kind of like this musicians helping musicians thing. And so we're actually going to be opening our grant application cycle, I think next week. So basically grants are going to be available, and the deadline will be October 15th.
Okay.
And any US-based musician who is not a student, you have to be a full working musician, can apply for this grant. And it's need-based, it's not merit-based, and it's just a one-time $500 grant. And it's just to help people who are having a rough time.
Oh, that is incredible. So you're an entrepreneur too. Well, add to your list, kick ass.
We all got the philanthropy bug. We're like, and now we're like, wait, we need some gigs too.
Wow. Just incredible. Absolutely incredible talking with you, and just personally so inspired, blown out of the water just by everything you've been able to accomplish and how you took COVID and just this time and turned it around and gave back and empowered others.
Thank you.
Very inspiring.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
excited to re-listen to your album just with everything we've talked about. I want to go check out the grants. Anything you'd like me to post, I would love to share it. Do the very small part I can as a very much starting out artist.
Oh, thank you. Well, obviously, I mean, if you can spread the word about the record and the Bandcamp link, that's always helpful. And then if you know any musicians who are based in the US who need help, just, send them to our website, www.livefromourlivingrooms.com.
Will do. Oh my gosh. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much for the time and
for
listening to the music. It's really it's after everything that happened, the whole life cycle of the pre-production, production, and post-production and release of this record. It just touches me in such a deep place in my heart to know that people, especially women musicians and artists, that it resonates with them, and and that it just speaks to you in a way that kind of energizes you. And really, that's the best compliment that I can get. I'm so glad that you enjoy the music, and thank you so much for all your great questions, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Thana. I hope to stay in touch. I'll have to send you my song then.
Please do, please. Yes. Collaboration.
And for those who tune in too, don't forget to sign up for your looping course. So send me the link and I'll post that too. So that
okay, that's not happening quite yet. I'm gonna be doing that later in the fall. But as soon as I have it, I will send it to you.
Okay, we've got a lot of things in the works. I'm super excited and hope to stay in touch.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself, and thank you again.
Thanks. You too. Stay safe and stay healthy.
You too. Thanks, Thana.
Bye.